tongue? Well, what's your explanation for her tongue popping up 6 years after she dies? And what about the men on the ice? Why'd they go out there?
All important questions that we'll try to answer and understand as it is time for us to discuss and break down episode 3, part 3 of True Detective, Night Country. As we open this episode with a flashback dating us back to April 22nd, 7 years before our main timeline, we officially meet Annie K, as Navarro is here to arrest her because of trespassing and destruction of property at the mine's facility, but Annie's a little bit busy, as she's in the middle of helping a woman give birth at the last birthing center in the region. Now, the woman giving birth doesn't seem to be a fan of Navarro, but Navarro finds herself helping in this pregnancy. Now, this is something I noticed throughout this episode. There looks to be pockets of the indigenous people of the town who don't seem to respect Navarro. As the baby arrives, you can tell that something's off, as the mother notices the baby isn't crying, as they perform CPR and the baby's okay. Now, I immediately thought to myself, seeing the joy and relief on Annie's face when she was able to help that baby, what if she experienced the unfortunate events of seeing these babies not making it out of their birth because of the mines? But what if she found a way to not only shut down the mines, but also assure the safety of her people? As we see Navarro taking in this moment, and you can see her perception of Annie has changed. Less than 5 minutes ago, she was here to arrest her, but now she has this understanding of the care that they have for one another. It's almost like she got a sense of family. Now, I was under the impression that yes, Navarro was close to Annie's case because it was awful what happened to her, but I also thought that they were close. But again, this scene shows us that this was the first time Navarro actually met Annie, and she only knew her a year after her death. Now, I wonder if they had other interactions after this, and if Annie was like a gateway for Navarro to get closer to her heritage, but things changed after Annie K died. Cut to present day, December 22nd, the 5th day of night. We see Hank calls in reinforcements to search for Clark, but we see that they're not all policemen. Some of these people are regular civilians who are locked and loaded with weapons and ready to kill on sight as the hunt for Clark begins. As Hank gives the orders and they head off, Navarro reminds him that they want him alive, but Hank questions if that's true. Now, of course, it's assumed that Clark is the killer and responsible for the death of the scientist, but also the main suspect in Annie K's murder, but I don't believe that to be true. But I want to go back and talk about Hank questioning if found, Clark should be put down. That's not proper protocol if you ask me, but I wonder if Hank got the call to kill Clark from Kate, or the powers that be who are behind the funding of the facility, they gave the call to kill Clark because he knows too much. Now, quick little detail, you'll notice that Navarro picks up an orange that one of the men drop as we cut to the opening credits, which shows the same orange in 2 shots. You have one of the orange rolling down on the ground, which we see later in this episode, and then you'll see here that the orange is peeled in the spiral formation. Now, as I pointed out in my last video, this time around, the last shot of the opening credits show the little red house that we see in this episode, which every end shot of the opening credits have had some type of significance or importance to that particular episode, and I'll be explaining the importance of this location a little bit later. Back at the station, Peter fills Liz in on the forensic technician who's booked on a evening charter, and Lund is still in a coma after getting both his legs amputated. Now, Clark's items from the trailer has been gathered in the evidence area as we see Liz is preparing to look through those 19 boxes as she tells Peter to call her new partner on this case, Navarro, which comes as a surprise to Peter. Now, Peter is given the orders to figure out a way to crack Annie's phone, but he's got a question on his mind for Liz. He wants to know what exactly happened between Liz and Navarro on their last case involving Wheeler, as Liz closes the door and gives him the details. Now, this was filed as a murder-suicide, as William Wheeler was a bad individual with a long track record of crimes. Even after multiple convictions, he managed to find his way out of jail, and he came across an 18-year-old in which he got into a relationship with, who he ended up abusing multiple times, but the girl never reported him. Everyone knew where this was headed, as it was just a matter of time before things got worse, as they eventually got the call. As we cut to that call, we see Navarro and Liz on the scene together, but they were too late, as the girl was dead. But remember, Liz said that it was a murder-suicide and that they were both dead when they got there, but we see clearly in this scene that William Wheeler was alive. Which leads me into my theory that I mentioned in my last video, that they did something to Wheeler and they kept it off the books. Now, they knew that he most likely would have gotten away with this, and they decided to take matters in their own hands, a secret that they kept between them. As Liz says, and Navarro felt that there was more that could have been done, and things got nasty between them, and that's why she was transferred to the troopers. End of the story. Now, we don't get the rest of that story in this episode, but I wonder if it'll be brought up again and if we will see what actually happened. But if we don't see what happened with that case, do you all think that Liz or Navarro shot Wheeler? And who do you think came up with the idea to say that he took his own life? And also, that tune that he was whistling, will that have any significance moving forward? I bet that one of them, most likely Navarro, will end up hearing that whistling at some point later in the season, and we'll find out exactly what happened with Wheeler. Now, this was a small detail that I don't know was mentioned in previous episodes, as Liz mentions to Peter to keep an eye on that bruise that his father gave him, but that he was a big-time hockey player before all this. So the questions I have, one, why did he quit, and why did he become a policeman? And two, obviously she knows that he was lying about falling on the ice and that being the reason why he got the bruise, but mentioning the hockey player past, this was said last week by Kate saying that he should teach her sons how to skate. And now we have it here. So now I'm starting to think, is this some type of foreshadowing evolving around Peter having a big moment on ice sometime later down the road in this show? But more importantly, it's brought up a few times that there's a possible intimate relationship between Peter and Liz that we'll be discussing a little bit later. Back with Navarro, she tosses the orange she found, but it mysteriously makes its way back to her, and there's a whisper as she senses a presence surrounding her, but she gets the call from Lulu. Now, this is just more proof that every single week that she's had some type of connection with the unknown, whether that's the polar bear in episode 1, the necklace from her mother that she found in episode 2, but going back to episode 2 with Rose telling her, does the dead either miss her, do they want to tell her something important or warn her, or do they want to take her with them? As we head back to the station with Liz and Navarro teaming up to look through Clark's belongings. One by one, they take a look at each of the items. They begin to see if they could find a way into this secret relationship. I love this shot of this almost symbolizing the endless circle as they're surrounded by all these moments between Annie and Clark, and it can't be a coincidence that them in the middle of this circle, and there was a nice touch as you all can see the photo of the spiral, it being a key to their relationship. As Liz finds a photo of them and she knows it's from spring of 2016 by the shirt that Annie is wearing, she notices the hair change in one of the photos as Navarro points out that they both seem to be happy in this relationship. But Liz says, how does this hot, fun girl end up with this weirdo? As Liz wants Navarro to play the game of asking the right questions, which is, why did they keep it a secret? As we have a moment to cut to tension in the room with this brief moment of levity between the two characters, we see Liz question Navarro if she's still sleeping with Kavik, and Navarro fires back with mentioning Liz's past relationships as Peter walks in the room. This moment does spark the idea for Navarro to question Kavik later in this episode. As Liz yet again shows her attention to details as she points out that one of the photos was taken by someone who wasn't in this relationship, but the question is who, as they find some blue hair dyeing on one of the photos as they head over to Susan, the stylist. As we find out that Susan lied to Navarro as she questions her, Susan brings up how many times Annie was stabbed, and that was a clear message for her to stay out of this. We notice that Susan's little girl is worried, but Liz takes it upon herself to get the little girl some food and ease her stress. Now, I don't know if it means anything, but this is the second time we've seen Liz with little kids and her being the complete opposite and being nice in a way towards those kids as she is the complete opposite with adults. Remember how nice she was for Darwin when he was building his Legos last week, and now we see this little girl. I believe that maybe Liz sees like Holden in these kids, and again, it's just a small little character detail that I've noticed and I really appreciate. As Susan tells Navarro that she would go to the station to give the scientists haircuts, but one day Annie begged for her to tag along, as Annie was apparently obsessed with coming with Susan, which I found to be very interesting. Now, as one thing led to another, really hit it off, and they talked all night, especially after she showed him her tattoo, which Clark took a very big interest in. Now, Susan says that Annie always dreamt of this tattoo when she was in high school, and once she got it, those dreams stopped. Now, my major questions is, why was Annie so obsessed with going to the station? Did she know what they were doing or what they were researching? Now, Annie having this tattoo coming from a dream, will we see or learn about these dreams, and did they lead her to Clark and they were destined to meet? But also going back to what I said earlier about Annie finding a way to help her people. What if the dream led her to Clark and she used him to get into the lab and had to get close to him in order to find what she discovers at the end of this episode? Now, during this conversation, we cut to Liz with the little girl. Initially, I didn't take much into her distracting the girl with innocent stories about unicorns skating on ice, but it is interesting that if you look up unicorns, you'll find that some people look at unicorns as a symbol of purity, innocence, and power. As it's also said that unicorns' horns can purify poison water. Such is the strength of their healing power. Now, we all know that the water in Ennis is going bad, so do we expect to see some unicorn popping up somewhere down the road? Or, if not a unicorn, do we maybe think that that polar bear will serve as a unicorn that we've seen so many different times in the show? Will the polar bear be the one that help out with this water? As Susan talks about how Clark was quite weird and she noticed a change in Annie once they got together. Annie didn't want anyone to know about this relationship, and Susan thought that to be very strange. She didn't tell the police or Navarro about this because after what happened to Annie, she was terrified. Plus, she was seeing a guy at the station as well, and his name was Oliver. Oliver was an equipment engineer who left right before Annie died. Now, he's a hunter who's living on the ice and doesn't want to be found. I wonder why he left the facility in the first place, and did he have some type of disagreement about what the scientists were actually doing there? Now, Susan does reveal that after Annie's body was found, she did indeed call the police at some point and she told them about Clark, as she said that she spoke to someone. Now, it's not said who she spoke to, but we all know it was Hank, someone that I've been keeping my eye on since episode 1. As we cut to them in the car, Navarro mentions how Hank took her off the case and buried this information about Susan calling, as Navarro knows something is corrupt and the mind is behind it all. Navarro goes over all the obvious connections that the mind is being involved, as Liz reminds her that half the town works for the mines, and of course, people would be complicit in keeping things under wraps to keep the town going because of the mines. As Liz goes on to bring up the key questions about the scientists and Clark and why did the scientists go on the ice, as Navarro gives her this look that points towards things going a little bit beyond the logic, as Liz mentions,
Come on. Don't give me that voodoo, E.T., cosmic, shoompa loompa.
Liz just doesn't want to attempt to understand what's possibly going on with the supernatural or the spiritual. Now, yet again, we get a little bit of comedy in this scene as Liz's phone goes off and it's a Tinder notification, and hearing her reasoning of how she picks and chooses her radius was pretty funny to me. But I do want to point out, while they shared some scenes together in the first 2 episodes, they mostly spent a lot of time apart. But seeing them looking over the evidence found in Clark's trailer, to playing the good cop, bad cop scenario with questioning Susan, to them having this ride along in the banter, I'm liking these moments between the 2 characters, and I really enjoy their chemistry together. As Navarro shares what she does on her lonely nights, which is watching Netflix, which, by the way, I'm surprised HBO allowed some other brand to be mentioned in their own platform, but she also talks about how she prays. As Liz kind of laughs at her, and Navarro responds by saying she doesn't talk to God, but instead,
I listen.
As Navarro goes on and talks about disappearing and just going off without stopping, you see that Liz seems to kind of understand what she's talking about. Now, I want to point out the theme throughout this episode, that Navarro has this sense of searching for something or being welcome into a loving type of community or a loving type of situation. Now, it's very clear that she loves her sister, but also one can say that taking care of her sister can be a burden on her. The thing that I really enjoyed about this episode that it really is focused on is you can't pick your family that you're born into. Which, speaking of family, back at the rink, I was thinking that Hank took Kate's advice of trying to convince Peter to drop being a policeman and getting back on the ice, but instead I questioned if Hank was maybe genuine in this moment, as he brings Peter's old skates that he found and he mentions that, hey, if you and my grandson maybe has an interest in skating, and Hank saying that he would like to join them if they decide to go for a skate. Was this a real moment for Hank, or was he somehow apologizing for sapping his son from last week, or was it something else entirely? As Navarro and Liz arrive, and Navarro goes straight to Hank and presses him about Susan's call. Hank claims that he dismissed Susan's call because she was rumored to have multiple relationships with men in the town, as Liz steps in and tells him to go back to his search and tells him that he's going to get written up for mishandling Annie's case, which leads him to telling her that he might report her for playing Mrs. Robertson to Peter. Now, for those wondering, the Mrs. Robertson is a term used to describe an older woman pursuing someone younger. It's also a reference to a song that became the character from the 1967 movie The Graduate. Now, I mentioned it earlier, but let's just talk about it. I've always perceived Liz and Peter's relationship to be kind of like a mother-son or a mentor-mentee, but after this scene and the gentle touch across his face with the bruise and the late night working and taking all of Liz's calls, do we now believe that there was maybe at one point a romantic relationship between Peter and Liz? Now, Navarro is clearly pissed that Liz is just going to write up Hank for what he did, and she ultimately leaves, which we see Peter telling Liz that the forensics guy is behind because of the weather, but Peter has an idea. He suggests to bring in his cousin, who's a vet that might be able to help. As we know, Liz is on the clock from Connolly as the 48 hours are almost up and we see the bodies are nearly thawed, which, by the way, I love the detail of the bodies thawing as it proceeds to the truth melting away, or the lies or secrets or these blocks of ice these characters have built around themselves is slowly melting away. Now, a perfect example of what I mean by this is displayed in the very next scene that displays the importance of the end of the opening credits. As Navarro pays a visit to Kavik, who's in the middle of nowhere catching fish, asks about Oliver. Reminder that again, this is the same location we saw in the opening credits. Now, Kavik claims that he doesn't know him, as she wants him to go around and ask where he can find Oliver. Now, he'll do this, but in exchange for her to give him information, and that is telling him something about herself. Now, initially she refuses, but we know how important this case is to her, so she ultimately goes back. Now, Kavik wants to know about her mom, as we learn that her mom was a local to Ennis who worked in a gold mining camp that no longer exists. She left at the age of 15 and went to Boston, where she met the father of their kids. Their dad was abusive to her and the kids, which ended up being the reason why they end up moving back to Ennis. Now, I don't want to glance over the fact that her mom worked at a gold mining camp in Ennis. Might be nothing, but we know that there's something going on with the mining community currently in Ennis. I wonder if more facts will come out about her mom and if anything will tie into what those old mining camps were into, or even the whereabouts of her father. Do we maybe believe that he found them in Ennis and he was the one that took her life? As she talks about her mother experiencing the same things that her sister Jules does, and that one day she just got up and left and never came back, and she ended up being dead and she was murdered and they never found her killer. Again, will we get more of her mother's story? And I wonder if her mother's death is at all connected to any of this is going on, as we learn that Navarro never was given her native name, as she begins to say that she wishes, but then she ends up stopping, as it's now time for Kavik to give her intel. Again, knowing that this little fish hut was in the opening credits and knowing it was used for fishing, I believe, metaphorically speaking, it was to show Kavik as us, as the audience, fishing for answers for Navarro's past. Now, circling back to the melting away of these characters and this scene being a reason why, I believe the closer Liz and Navarro get to facing their past or listening to what the supernatural or the spiritual is trying to say to them, the closer they'll get to solving both of these cases. As we take a detour, remember the importance of wanting to be a part of something or welcome to a community.
It's fine. Anybody who cares is welcome here.
As we meet up with Leah and her girlfriend, who are going to this gathering with the protesters against the mines, you hear them mentioning all the wrongdoings of the miners and the effects it is having on the town, as we hear some very unfortunate news. As it's announced that a baby of one of the members was a stillborn, as they have a moment of silence. Now, I think it's safe to assume that the death of the baby was in result to the effects of the mines. Now, I'll be honest, I don't really know or have a clue where Leah's subplot is leading to, but I will say I feel like her story is missing one or two scenes to really bring her characters to these motives to where she's at so far in this show. But speaking to the scene, for me, it showed Leah feeling a sense of belonging, but I feel this will cause a rift between her and her stepmom, Liz. I can see Leah getting more involved with the protest and something bad happening, or she'll discover something very important. But my biggest takeaway from this scene and many others in this episode is showing us the effects the town has from the mines. Whether it's their water, their air, and even their loved ones are losing their lives because of the very thing that keeps the town financially stable. Now back with Liz, as she's looking over the case files of Annie, listening to white noise. She looks to be starting dinner, but she stops. As she puts the food in the fridge, she hears something coming from the fridge. Now I couldn't make it out, but it sounded like an echo or a whisper. Which leads me to wondering, was this more signs of the supernatural or something or someone from the dead trying to reach her? Or my super conspiracy is, what if her house is being surveillanced and they're trying to listen in to what Liz might know? Now Liz stops listening to this noise because Leah is now home, and she finds out that she's been around the protesters, and she yells at her and tells her, do you know what happens to those people? Now I took that line as her referring to the people getting arrested like we saw Annie at the beginning of this episode, or end up dead like we know what happened to Annie. As we see, Leah just wants Liz to care more about what's happening to these people as she brings up what happened to this baby earlier. Now, the news doesn't stop Liz from forcing Leah to take off her markings on her face, and honestly, I felt bad for Leah in this moment, but I think in Liz's eyes, she believes that she's protecting her. Now, as Liz heads back downstairs, she's looking over Annie's dead body on the photos, and I felt like in this moment, she's starting to show or to look closer into this case, but more importantly, she's starting to care more and she's taking this more personal. Because honestly, I think that she sees Leah in this photo. And just to bring this up, we still don't know what happened to Liz's husband and Leah's dad, and I wonder if he was a protester, or was he more in tune with his roots, and this might have caused the issue in their relationship, and Liz doesn't want to go through this again with Leah. As we cut back to Navarro, she yet again senses something and she sees what appears to be a child in the distance. She chases after this child, but she ends up slipping on the ice and hitting her head. As we cut to her in a dreamlike sequence, waking up in the daylight, you can hear a whisper and it sounds like someone says, listen, to me, which is implying that she needs to listen like she listens during her prayers. As a child holding the same bear that we've seen before, as we don't see the face of the child, but I think that it's safe to assume that it was Holden, as Holden puts his hand on her shoulder and says, "Get my mommy." Now the location is unknown, but if you look behind her during this scene, you'll notice that an accident has occurred. Now I mentioned it back in episode 1 that I think that Holden might have gotten into an accident, but then I also said in episode 2 breakdown that maybe he was attacked and killed by that polar bear. But more importantly in this scene, if this is indeed Holden, is she trying to send a message to his mother Liz through Navarro? As Navarro gets a call about her sister, as she's had a recent breakdown and said that someone was coming, and she ended up running off from work, as Navarro knows exactly where to find her sister. Now Navarro finds her at this abandoned boat on ice. Not sure why she's here, but I would guess that this is maybe a place she goes when she has these types of breakdowns, even when she was maybe younger. As Jewel talks about the water and the sea, she talks about thinking about bad things. Now I'm wondering who she was referring to about someone bad is coming, but also going back to her comments about the water and the sea, and does she know the connection between the bad water and the mines, and is the supernatural trying to communicate through Jules, and Jules trying to tell her sister to look more into the mines. As we head over to Peter's house, he tries to sneak in but ends up making noise and waking up the whole house. We have him and Kayla talking about Liz and the control that she has over him, as they talk about the difference of when they first met and him becoming this cop, and he ultimately gets interrupted because, you guessed it, Liz is on the phone asking about Oliver. I do want to talk about going back to maybe an issue or a criticism that I have. Similar to the Leah plot, I feel like the Kayla and Peter's family drama seems a little bit forced and there's not enough evidence to really kind of boost up this subplot. Let me know if you guys are feeling the same thing in the comments below. But pointing out back-to-back scenes, illustrating these characters being almost identical in their situations, dealing with the differences or misunderstandings amongst their loved ones. Whether that's Leah wanting to be a part of a community and doing something that matters and Liz having trouble understanding that, we have Navarro not being able to fully understand what her mother and her sister were dealing with, and then again, we have Kayla not being happy with Peter's commitment to his job with Liz's orders. Now, I'm wondering who's going to reach their breaking point first. Will it be Leah? Will it be Kayla? Will it be Jules? Or who will possibly lose the person closest to them first because of this case? As it is December 23rd, the 6th day at night, we cut to seeing Liz walking into what I assume was a prayer session amongst the women, as we see Liz has to step away, almost like this was too much for her to take in or to be around. We see her in the bathroom and she's washing her hands and she sees just how bad the water actually is, yet again another reason for her digging more into what's actually going on with these mines. Again, this episode putting an emphasis on these characters really listening to what's going on. We have Liz talking to Leah about what's going on with the people and what happens to that baby, and literally she's seeing firsthand the conditions that some of these people of the town who live closer to the mines are going through. Back at the rink, the bodies continue to melt as Peter's cousin Vince takes a look at them. Vince tells Liz that they didn't freeze to death, they actually died before they froze. He believes that they might have suffered from a cardiac arrest and that they were so afraid that they were literally scared to death. As Navarro comes in, as she's found the location of Oliver, and they head that way. As we wrap up this episode, and before they meet Oliver, was it just me, or is this the same guy that we met at the very opening of the show, the same guy that was in the scene with the caribou? Now, Liz and Navarro go into this man's house without permission as he threatens to shoot them. Now, he asks who Navarro is, and not who she is as far as a state trooper, but what is her name? What is her ties to her heritage, as he mentions that she must have just forgotten. Again, another example of how some of the natives have this personal kind of disrespect towards Navarro. Now, in this scene, Oliver is shocked to learn what happened to the scientists, but he only mentions Lund and not the others. He eventually forces them out, but again, I know Lund is the one that runs the facility, but why was he the only one that he mentioned? It seemed like there was some type of importance behind that. I definitely think that Oliver knows more of what actually happened to them, as Liz gets the call that Lund is awake. We learn that he's lost his eyesight, he's acting very aggressive, as we see Liz doesn't have much time to talk to him because he's going in and out. Now, she asks him the important question, what actually happened when they were on that ice? He tells her that they woke her and now she's out in the ice. Now, was he referring to Annie? Is this the town legend, or is this something attached to the spirals? He tells her,
who's out there? She came for us. In the dark.
As there's a commotion going on outside and there was an accident on the police search, Navarro is told to watch over Lund while Liz tries to stop this fight going on outside. As we see him rising up and says,
Hello, Evangeline. Your mother says hello. She's waiting for you.
And he points and goes back down, and he eventually dies. Now, a couple things I want to point out about this scene. Number one, you notice that the spiral is missing from Lund's head. And one would say once he arrives at the hospital and once he went under for his surgery, they probably cleaned him up and removed it. But as I mentioned in last week's breakdown, I feel like the symbol was maybe a protection, and once it was removed, he ended up dying. Now, you also notice that his voice changed when he was talking to Navarro. Now, I wonder if this message came from Navarro's father. I know in the comments some of you all feel that everything that's going on that's supernatural has a logic. It can be scientifically explained, but how the hell do you explain this? We all know that Navarro has a family history of her mother and her sister being able to communicate with the dead, and we see that Navarro is starting to have those type of communicational skills with the dead, whether it was the polar bear, the necklace, or the boy in this very episode. I think that Navarro does have the ability to speak to the dead, but she just refuses to kind of channel in that energy. But going back to what Rose said in episode 2, I believe that Ennis is the perfect location where the dead and the living can coexist. As our final scene shows, Peter has cracked the phone of Annie and shows Navarro and Liz the last video on her phone. As we see Annie saying that she found it, it's here, something makes a noise in the background, grabs her, and we see her being pulled off the screen. Now, I could be wrong, but as she drops the phone, and if you look at this image here, is that the spiral? Now, we remember this phone was found in Clark's trailer. Was he with Annie when she was under attack? Was that Clark? Was that something else entirely? But also in this scene, where was Annie? Is this what the scientists have been looking for? We all know the scientists were looking for something old and ancient, and we know that this was funded by the Tuttle family. Is it connected to the murders of season 1 and 3? What did Annie find, and who did the scientists find alive? So many reveals, but also so many questions remain on the table. We find out that the scientists were literally scared to death on the ice. We find a little bit more information about the Wheeler case, and hopefully getting more information about that. Everything going on with Susan and her story. Is there more to her story? What actually happened to Navarro's mom? Who killed her? So many great moments that went down. And keeping the tradition of naming these episodes, I'm going to give the title of this episode Words from the Dead, or A Message from the Dead. Share your titles of this episode in the comments below. Overall, back to my melting of the ice of the bodies. This episode peeled the layers back of the characters' guards that are being put down. We're getting to see more of their inner scars. But one of the major things that I really enjoyed about this episode, I love the presence felt throughout this episode of the natives of Ennis, from the physical presence of them in this episode, the sounds and the voices and the praying that we heard throughout this episode being echoed was just so beautifully placed. And the fact that we got a different perspective of what the people of Ennis go through in dealing with the mind's effect on them and their family, but we also see the strength and the resilience of the indigenous community. Watching Navarro walking in on the birth and the strength of how they all came together, with Leah witnessing the gathering of the protesters and Liz seeing the prayers of these women, I think in order to solve this case, they're going to have to lean on this community to help them find what's going on, whether that's spiritually, through healing, or guidance of this community. I think they will ultimately be the reason why this case is solved. Highlighting some of my favorite moments in this episode, my favorite scene, I love how good Liz is at her job and seeing her and Navarro in the station, putting the pieces to the puzzle of this mystery. That was my favorite scene. Creepy or scared moment of the week to me is no doubt seeing that Deadite, aka Luns, waking up from his death and giving that message to Navarro was spooky as hell. And if I were to give a favorite character this episode, I gotta say Liz. I love seeing her caring side, whether that's with the kid or with Peter, which again, let me know if you think that there's a relationship between those two. But I really love that we're getting all these complex relationships and seeing the different sides of Liz in this character. Now, if you are still here at this point, again, I thank you all so much. Do me a favor and let me know if you're still here by putting in the comments right now, hashtag Liz and Navarro. Put that in the comments right now. And again, I thank you all for sticking on to this point in the video. Join me same time, same place next week as we break down episode 4, part 4. But before then, join me right now this Sunday evening for a live after show, going over this episode, taking your live questions, hearing you all's thoughts and theories as we move forward in the show. So click the link in the chat right now as well as in the description, and I hope to see you all live. Make sure to leave your thoughts on this episode in the comments. Again, thoughts, theories, favorite moments, least favorite moments. Let's have some conversations in the comments below. You all are awesome. Stay safe, and I'll see you all on the next video.